I am Joshi, and it's my privilege to introduce our first keynote speaker, Mr. David Keynan. Mr. David Keynan is the Vice Chairman of Federation of Indo-Israeli Chambers of Commerce. Mr. David was formerly the Managing Partner at BDO 121, the Indian Army of BDO Ziv have from Israel. At his role in BDO 121, David has led several business consulting and business initiation activities, including multiple joint ventures and cross-border distribution agreements. Prior to starting BDO 121, Mr. David was a member of the Intel Capital India team, managing Intel's India investments. He continued with Intel and relocated to India for 3 years to lead Intel investments in the telecom space. He was the vice chairman of the technology committee at the Israel Asia Chamber of Commerce and chairman of the India committee at the High Tech Industry Association. Mr. David completed his BSc in mathematics and philosophy from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He is the first Israeli to be admitted as a chartered member of the Indus Entrepreneurs. May I now request Mr. David to deliver the keynote address.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you had a good morning. First, I would like to thank my predecessors, the extremely important and interesting panel that happened just now, and before that, the presentation of the ex-Tata Sons chairman, Mr. Gopalakrishnan. With your kind permission, I would like to share with you a presentation. So I would add the presentation. I would like to discuss in the next 40 minutes odd to discuss the role of government in spurring innovation, specifically in troubling times, in challenging times. I would give the example of what the Israeli government has done in the early 90s. What was the situation in Israel? What were the thoughts behind the government activities? What was done and what was the impact? Needless to say that post the short presentation, I hope not to speak more than 25, 30 minutes. We will be open for question and answers, which is going to be moderated by the St. Joseph's management team. So with your kind permission, I'll start with a few words about us. We'll talk about a little bit about us, then the Israeli business ecosystems from the inception of Israel until the early 90s, the Yozma project, which is the government initiative in order to start VC activities in Israel. How did the Yozma program practically created what is now known as the Startup Nation, which is Israel, and what can we learn globally and in India today from that initiative? I'll start with a quick word about us. We are the Indo-Israeli Chamber of Commerce. We are a non-government, industry-led, non-government organization that links between business communities in Israel and India. We were set up in 2012. We have now close to 100 members here in India. We have done in the past multiple activities between Israel and India, ranging from simple cross-border purchasing transactions to JVs. We advise governments on both sides, and we enjoy very much assisting and the growth of the business between these two very interesting and very dear to my heart countries. As you said, we operate in multiple areas. We have a very large employment services activity. Actually, we are the fourth largest Israeli employer in India after huge organizations like Amdocs, Netafim, the irrigation company, and one more company. We do multiple activities in the IT space. We operate relatively extensively in the agri-space, and actually together with our Israeli partners, a company by the name of Profit Agro, we installed the first fully hydroponic raft system operations in India. It was done roughly 3 years back, and we expect that in the next 5 years we would create the largest hydroponic operations in India together with the local partner. Of course, given the relationship between Israel and India, we work in the defense and aerospaces as well. A word about the relationship between Israel and India. Till 1992, due to multiple reasons, there were no formal diplomatic ties between Israel and India. The official official role, the official relationship started in 1992. Israel's president, Mr. Ezer Weizmann, came to India in 1997, and the reason he came is because before Israel was formed, he was a pilot in the RAF, in the British Air Force, and his pilot training course was done here in Bangalore. So he came in order to visit the training that he was doing just here in Bangalore. And later on, we had, again, multiple visits. And I think that the relationship have boosted in the last few years, mainly due to the extremely close personal relationship between Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Modi and Prime Minister Modi. Mr. Netanyahu came here, it was 2 years back, 2.5 years back. I was lucky to be one of the business executives who were selected to join the visit of Mr. Netanyahu to Israel, which was of great bless to both countries. And I'm sure that specifically after what happened in the last year with the Abraham Accord agreements between Israel and the Gulf countries, we would see, and of course a very close relationship between India and the Gulf countries, we would see that the trade between Israel and India is going to continue develop in the next 5-10 years at least. A little bit on the Israeli economy from the day of inception till the early 90s. As you know, Israel was incepted more or less the same time as India. India was in November 1947. We were in May 1948. For the first 15 years, most of the effort in Israel was in accepting, receiving, and assimilating Jewish immigration from all over the world. When Israel was established in 1948, the population was 6 lakh people. Yes, 600,000 people was the total population in Israel. And in a period of less than 10 years, we have received more than 1.5 million in Jewish immigrants, which came practically from all over the world, mainly from Europe, as a result of the Holocaust, World War II and the Holocaust that just happened a few years before, and from the Arab world, mainly from Morocco, Iraq, Tunisia, Egypt, and so on. So receiving and assimilating such a large number of people has almost by definition dictated a very tight government-led economy, and we start to see the shift from a government-led economy to something which is closer to be a free market during the late 60s, early 70s, and then by mid 70s again, a couple of global phenomena are happening in the background, but the Israeli economy grew up very, very fast in the first 20-25 years. But then, because of the fact that we don't have any immediate market, we started to see that the growth is stagnating because practically we have no one to sell, no one to trade with. That happened in the 70s and in the 80s. And during the early 80s, we understood that our potential market would be the European market, what was called the Western world, the European market and the US. However, these markets are not directly connected to Israel. So by definition, in order to sell into these markets, we need to create products and services which could be sold in relatively remote, more or less the same thing that we are seeing happening in India during these days. I remind you, Infosys was established in 1981, TCS in 68, but the boost again is happening in the early 80s. Still, the growth was much slower than what we wanted to happen. And then by the early 90s, the Israeli government said that in order for us to compete in the upcoming world, we need to significantly boost the private sector, specifically innovation, which is led by the private sector. So the Israeli government started what is called the Yozma project. Yozma, that's a Hebrew word for initiation. So if you would Google Yozma, you would find zillion of because it's practically initiation. So no, but the idea was to create practically out of nothing, to create a vibrant VC community and startup community. So how did the Israeli venture capital market look before 1993? First, very little capital. Okay, in Israel, most of the capital was used in order to be invested in heavy industries, in agriculture, and so on, real estate. Small local economy, so there was the startup. Even when we had a startup, it was very hard for these startups to look for to immediately look for the market, and the ability to attract smart money. Smart money is money that could help you reach customers, was very limited. There were a couple of rich Jewish people, mainly from the US and the UK, that invested a little bit in Israel, but it was really a drop in the bucket. So the Israeli government said that, okay, we have extremely good universities, very good R&D centers, specifically the army-led R&D capabilities in Israel are extremely high. However, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough smart money in order to compete in the world. So what the government has done, we came out with a public-private partnership program that would assist VCs to establish a new VCs in Israel. And the idea is to for each body, for the government and for the private enterprises, each side should try to bring the best that they could into the Israeli VC market, and together to build an ecosystem practically out of nothing. What the VCs were bringing, if you look at the VC side of the presentation, that's the classical role of a VC: choosing the right investment, helping raise more funds, assisting in the exit, and managing the risk. That's what VCs are doing globally, all over the world, all the time. So why couldn't they do it in Israel in the early 1990s? Because there was no ecosystem. There were no repeating entrepreneurs. It was not clear on how to take technologies either from the army or from universities and take them out into and create startups out of them and so on. So there were VCs who were potentially looking at Israel, but they felt that the risk factor investing in Israel is still much higher than investing it in the US or in Europe. So we are shifting now to the government side. What the government is saying, okay, we understand you guys from the global VC community, we understand that you see the value in Israel, but we fully understand that there are several risk factors that you guys are not sure of, and you are a little bit hesitant in order to set up your funds in Israel, in order to put your money in Israel. So let's see, how could we help on the one hand without without forcing you, without controlling you. On the other hand, the last thing on the world that a VC likes is government management. Thanks, but no thanks. If the government is going to manage my VC fund, been a pleasure. Thank you. I'll use my money some other place. So the way that the Israeli government has done it, and here we would here we would go to what has happened. It said the Yozma program. Yozma is initiative. We say that the government brings money. The government has changed some of the IP ownership rules and so on in order to promote taking out IP from both universities and the army into private startups. But the way that we're going to give you money is going to be, we're going to share the risk with you, but we will not control you. So the idea was relatively simple. If you want to set up a venture capital firm, we would give half the money. On each dollar that you bring, we bring $1 more. We are not going to sit on your investment committee. We are not going to dictate what to do with the money. And if and when the exit comes and we would see a return, we would get our money back only on interest, and any upside beyond nominal interest would go to the VC firm. So practically, the government came and told global VCs, we are willing to share the risk with you, but we are going to let you enjoy the upside if and when. That created a huge how do you call it, benefit and stimulus for foreign VC funds to come and invest. Practically, the government is coming and saying, we are sharing the risk with you. We don't tell you what to do. And if and when a success would come, the profit is all going to be yours. And any reasonable VC fund, of course, would run to do that. And if you take a look later on, what was the outcome? So we'll see in a second what was the life cycle. Okay, so the government is acting only as a catalyst. We do not manage, we do not force you, we do not tell you who to invest. We present companies to you. We work with incubators and so on in order to incubate new ideas, new ventures, and so on. But again, we do not manage the investment. You're the expert. You're going to manage the investment. And if you take a look at the results, the returns of the Yozma program, each of these VCs have created an IRR. You're an MBA student, so I'm sure that you know what IRR is. Have created an IRR on average. Every VC firm that was part of the Yozma program, the IRR was, if I recall correctly, around 45% IRR on average between all the VC firms. The top two VC firms have created an IRR of 200 and odd %. You do not see it in the VC industry ever. I mean, maybe today in these crazy days, you see such kind of returns for VC firms. This financial support was part of a much larger program that the Israeli government was looking at all the various stages of innovation, from pre-seed to funding generic R&D to funding competitive R&D. So even after the government put money in the VCs and the startup has started and has started to work, they could apply to the Israeli government in order to get funds for R&D, to get funds for innovation. So practically the Israeli government has joined and funded in risk capital and in providing competitive IP throughout the life cycle of a startup. Again, all the time the government is supporting it, but A, without managing it, and B, we only share the risk with you. The upside is always going to stay with the private entity. The result of all that is, of course, that today we see that the Israeli VC industry is only second to the US and to a certain extent India. I give multiple lectures on the Indian tech economy to Israeli startups, to Israeli bodies, and so on. And I said that today in the world, practically you have four innovation centers in the world, which is the West Coast and Silicon Valley, the East Coast around Boston, India specifically Bangalore, and Israel, Tel Aviv and its suburb. You could not understand what is going on in the tech world without understanding what is happening in these four centers. Of course, in terms of what are the sectors that the Israeli government has promoted, practically we promote the full life cycle. Of course, ICT, agri and clean energy, lots of work in biofarm, in bio and farm, and medical devices and so on. I'm sure that you're all familiar with multiple medical devices that came out of Israel. Specifically, one of the early innovators in cardiac stents is an Israeli company, which I was lucky to work with them on the Indian environment. Of course, in the IT space, multiple, the Discon Key and so on. In the agri space, I'm sure that you all heard of deep irrigation, but deep irrigation was invented practically in the early 60s. Till date, the Israeli agri-tech companies are leading the world when it comes to agri-innovation. The Vulcani Institute, which is Israel's Center for Agri R&D, is considered to be the center with the most expensive, most valuable agri intellectual property in the world, more than any other center in the world, more than what we see in any single institute in the US and so on. It is being valued by multiple billions of dollars. No one really knows what it is giving a specific number, but the value that we see over there is extremely high, and it is all being funded and supported, and I would say visioned by the Israeli government. Again, if we take a look at what are the various aspects, practically the Israeli government is financing and assisting the private market in each and every aspect of the operation. So it's not just financing, not just promoting innovation, not just IP, but trying to look at the various aspects of innovation and giving as much support as the government could to each of the steps in the value chain without forcing its views on the private enterprises in between. Now, if we take a look at the impact of that, of course, is after a blip in the early 2000s. I'm sure that you guys know the dot-com bubble and so on. But after that, the Israeli VC community has stayed as a leading VC and startup community globally. You could see governments from all over the world which are coming, governments and VCs which are coming to Israel in order to understand how does it work, what could be implemented from Israel in their countries. Again, if we compare Israel to other geographies, Israel is almost as high as the entire Europe and UK. We are not at the size of the US, of course, but still extremely high. Definitely compared to the size of the industry, to the population, Israel is a global innovation center, and I think that it is almost impossible to think of the Israeli economy, and specifically the Israeli innovation economy, without the government support, even today, but definitely in the initial stages. Again, the early 90s were tough times in Israel. The Israeli economy, it was not clear how it would integrate into the global economy, and the Yozma program practically took this relative crisis, hard time, and turned it into an opportunity that has maintained the Israeli economy for 30 years going forward. Number of startups, amount of money which is being raised, and so on. If we take a look at global at countries which are coming to Israel, that has learned from Israel on the Yozma program and try to implement something which is relatively similar. We could see again countries from both Asia as well as Europe. I was lucky to be part of the Israeli team that was advising both the Korean government as well as the Taiwanese government on implementing the Yozma-like program in their countries. There has been multiple discussions and idea sharing between Israel and India in these areas. India hasn't selected the exact same model as the Yozma program, but has multiple programs which have learned a lot from the Yozma program and are coming again on the public-private partnership. Of course, there is the I4D, the Indo-Israeli Innovation Fund, again, which I was lucky to be part of the team that initiated, and I'm still very active in that. The multiple Indian government programs in innovation management, and so on, from central government. Here in Karnataka, just recently, our chairman, Mr. B.V. Naidu, was selected to be the chairman of the Karnataka IT Innovation Fund, which again has learned a lot and implemented many of the ideas that were discussed, that were thought of in the Yozma program, into the Karnataka program. If you take a look at the international companies which are operating in Israel, you could practically copy and paste this list of companies into the Indian environment, and this is not by mistake. As I said before, Israel and India have grown together. The IT has grown together, even though in Israel it was more based on innovation and startups. In India, it was more based on services and high scale. But practically, the global tech market has grown practically in the same time in these two geographies. What we do not see here is the number of Indian acquisitions in Israel and Israeli acquisitions in India. I was lucky to lead, I think, is the most interesting M&A between Israel and India in the last few years, when Flipkart has acquired the Israeli company which is called Upstream. It was a deal that came to me practically out of nothing. We have worked with our friends at the Avendus Capital. It was not an easy deal, but in the end, Flipkart has acquired Upstream in Israel to be the first R&D center for Flipkart outside of Bangalore, leave aside outside of India. And till date, the Israeli center of Flipkart, what used to be Upstream, is managing all of the price optimization and cyber activities for Flipkart, and working hand in hand with the R&D team here in India. Again, I was lucky to be part of that deal. What can we learn? What I could say what we have learned now. The Yozma program started in 1993. We are now in 2021, almost 30 years later. What can we learn in general? What can we learn which is relevant to India? The main thing I believe that we could learn is government has a major role in any part of the economy, but definitely in spurring innovation, even though theoretically, innovation is a change, and the last thing that governments like to do is change, but still, a progressive, well-thought, positive government would always think how to change life, how to change the economy in order to create the greater good for the long term. This is what happened in Israel. Many things have happened in India as well. Okay, and what is true in general is definitely true in the area of innovation. Again, it's very hard for government entities to be part of the innovation cycle, yet the support is, I could say, mandatory, extremely important. On the other hand, what we've learned is that the government should support but should not manage innovation. So it's a delicate balance between promoting, assisting, funding, sparing innovation, while not choking innovation on by forcing government processes you could not have. Governments are thinking 30 years ahead. A startup is looking 3 months to a year going forward. You could not force government processes on innovation. But so that's the delicate balance. Help, assist, spare, foster as much as you can, but don't choke. Don't force yourself on that environment. It was true in Israel in the early 90s. I could say that to a certain extent it is true globally all the time, and that's the balance which governments should look for. What can we learn specifically in India? First, I think I lived in India since 2003, and I've seen the Indian tech environment shifting from practically being pinpointed with a couple of large companies like Infosys and TCS, but that's it, to the amazing things that we see here today. Practically every second MBA graduate is opening their own company with much innovation and much thought and lots of risk taking and so on. And in that respect, I believe that the relationship between Israel and India, which has grown and became much stronger in the last 20-25 years, would continue to build, and innovation would be one of the core areas that we would see the relationship between Israel and India going forward and expanding. I would like to thank you all very much, and let the time for Any questions? I'm all yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. David, for sharing your in-depth knowledge on government and private sector partnership. The best of all I liked was when you said the quote, support but not manage. The government should support but not manage innovation. So one of our audience had the query on, it's not a query, but expansion on what you meant by saying that, support but not manage innovation.
Sorry, what is the question?
The question is basically to expand on what do you mean, or by giving an example on how to support rather manage.
So that was practically what we have discussed.
Yes, exactly. Okay.
Give money, give direction, connect to potential customers, try to look for interesting IP that could be privatized into the private sector.
Right.
However, do not impose your rules and regulations on the way that the company is being managed internally.
Right. Yeah, I specifically like the YOSMA program, which you have been discussing. It's very encouraging to also see a pan-global presence of people following the program. Sir, also, one more point, when you were mentioning about the different fields of activity, you've mentioned that definitely it's evident that Israel is leading in agro innovation. Would you like to give a small example of that?
Yeah, I would be more than happy to. That's one of the companies that we are working with, a company by the name of Profit Agro. They're one of the global innovators in what is called HRS, hydroponic graft systems. One of the key issues in the global agri market, but definitely in India, is having efficient usage of water. Okay. Historically, in India, water was considered to be, if you were a farmer, you would drill a borewell in your farm and take out the water, and practically that's it. However, I think that by now we understand that this method might not be effective in the long run, because practically that's a very inefficient way of using water. What Profit Agro is doing, they've created a raft system which practically the water, the plants are on a raft inside a small pond. So the plants are practically swimming in the water. 100% of the water is being used are being used by the plant. There's zero wastage of water, because it doesn't go down to the soil, because this it's in a container. It doesn't evaporate up because you have the rafts on top. So only the water which is being used by the plant is being used. All the rest of the water is being conserved. We reach something like 25 to 50 times production, edible vegetable per quantity of water compared to open field cultivation. So if a farmer would get, 1 kg of palak out of 50 liters of water or 100 liters of water, we could reach the same outcome by using maybe 1, maybe 2 liters of water. This is tremendous change for the Indian environment, and again, specifically what we see right now, that India, just like the rest of the world, there is a major water shortage. So this technology would allow a way more efficient usage of water per vegetable product. I hope I was clear.
Yes, sir, very much clear. And thank you so much for sharing that. I hope my fellow Josephites would have make a note of it and would reach back to you on that.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. It's an immense pleasure to have you and have learned about many detailing things about managing innovation in challenging times. Thank you, sir,
Thank you very
again.
much.
And